Hey, check it out. So you want to draw, you want to illustrate, but you're not sure how to go about it. Well, there are certain steps you can take to make the process easier, and I'm going to show you how to do it. Okay? So I have this object here as an example that we're going to draw. Okay? I picked this object because it has an interesting shape to it. It has certain properties that make it interesting. Okay? But it's not simple. It's not too simple. It's not a box. It's not like a circle. It's like a combination of many different shapes. If it was too simple, like a box, then we wouldn't really be challenging ourselves or stretching our ability to perceive, right? We wouldn't be exercising very intensely in a way. If you like compare it to like going to the gym, it's like lifting very light weights versus heavier weights. Okay, the same thing applies with drawing objects. There are more complicated objects that incorporate more details, and there are less complicated, more primitive objects like cubes or cylinders, cone shapes, things like that have a more simplistic, minimalistic type of structure to it. Okay. Now the reason I'm showing you it with this paper backdrop is that it allows you to focus on the object and not be distracted by the noise behind it, by varying changes and textures that may be conflicting or challenging your eye's ability to sense what is actually going on. Okay, I'll be taking a picture while holding this up so that we could have something set that doesn't change, because we may not be able to keep the object here in this location, in this position for the entire time that we're drawing it. So I'm going to be using a photograph and drawing from the photograph, and I'll also show how you can use a grid to help you measure perceptively where details are aligned next to other details. That's kind of why you might see an artist holding up a pencil when they look at something. What they're trying to do is align certain details with other details so that it gives you a sense of relativity between one detail and another detail, right? Not all details align with all the other details. You're looking for specific details that are easy to see based on a horizontal or a vertical alignment. This shape is very dynamic, has a lot of unique details in relation to other details. Okay, it's not very straight, it's not a box, it's very curved, so it's difficult to do that, use this technique. That's why we're going to use a grid. We're going to overlay a grid on top of it, and you will see how effective this is at giving you more structure to create your image. Okay, it's like it's similar to how builders might use wires, metal wires inside concrete to give it more stability, right? They have this internal structure, and then you lay other details on top of it that kind of hold on and grasp to that more rigid structure and give it more strength, basically. So by using a grid, we allow us to increase the strength of our ability to measure and perceive what exactly we're trying to draw. Okay, here's an example of a Lamborghini that I drew using a grid. It's an illustration of a more complicated object. It involved many different lines and angles that can be quite difficult to put together across a large space. The grid made it simpler. Here's a grid overlaid on top of the photo that I took. I've decided to use 11 columns and 15 rows. This will give us plenty of structural lines to construct the image. So let's begin drawing our grid. I measured out the size so that it fills the majority of the page. Each square will be 5/8 of an inch in dimension. I try to draw the lines as precisely as possible. However, due to the dull edges of the ruler and the pencil, it can be difficult to get the positioning exactly right. The tip of the pencil can go under the edge of the ruler if the pencil is held at a shallow angle, so it is important to hold it so that the tip travels along the correct path that you want to draw. I use my laptop to display the photo while I draw. I look at it often to explore where details align on the grid, and I translate that information to my drawing. For instance, I notice that the top of the object aligns closely with the base of the second row and begins at the left edge of the third column. The opening at the top of the object spans across the third row. The handle of the object extends from this area on the right. I continue to look back and forth between the photo and my drawing to compare where details in the photo should be drawn inside the grid. As I look at the contours of the object, there are instances where the edge runs through or near the corners of grid spaces. Take these locations for instance. As I draw the lines, I make sure they run through those points on the grid and curve the line how I see it. This process continues as we define the main components of the image. The contours of the object tend to be the main focus because the edges against the blank background create a distinct separation that is easily sensed by the eyes. So in this case, I mostly move around the perimeter to develop an overall shape of the object. This outer boundary of the object provides a good framework for attaching details that extend into the space within. It acts similar to the way the grid does to strengthen the structural integrity of the image. Having an accurately drawn boundary will help make the details within become more accurate as well. There is this fractal-like pattern to the process that exists at every level. By practicing this, it also extends this pattern into our minds and allows us as artists to develop into more structured and capable beings. Perhaps it goes even further than that. Notice that I begin to focus on details within where the value changes are distinct. This is a good indication that we are beginning to think about the light and dark values and are ready to move on to shading it. Here's the line work of the drawing next to the photo. As you can see, the shape of the object has been translated relatively accurately. There may be some slight differences in certain locations. This is due to human error caused by overlooking how certain details relate with other details. This is to be expected and something that is difficult to avoid because we have tendencies to focus on specific details that stand out and may not focus enough on others that can be more subtle. By exercising this process, we can improve our ability to notice more subtle details and find their relativity with others. When we're looking at an object, what we're seeing is the light rays bounce off of the object and entering our eyes. Now, based on the way the light is deflected off the surfaces, you'll get light that hits your eye more directly and light that hits it less directly or less intensely, because sometimes the light gets absorbed, sometimes it gets reflected and doesn't get absorbed much. You can see that with the duller parts of the object here. It's causing the light to become diffused or scattered in other directions, whereas other areas that are more shiny cause the light to be deflected more directly. So the light doesn't get scattered or diffused as much in those areas. Okay? there are rods and cones in our eyes that absorb this light. The cones absorb the color information of the light, the wavelengths, okay? Whereas the rods just absorb the light, and they don't get any color information, or they don't translate that information. In any case, we have this matrix of rods and cones on the surface inside our eyes, okay? And as we look around, the light changes across that matrix, okay, of rods and cones, okay? So we can sense the changes as we look around. That's why when we look this way, we see a different arrangement of values and colors. When we look this way, we see another different arrangement of values and colors in our viewpoint, inside our eyes. And so an important exercise that you need to do in order to draw things more effectively is related to looking in different directions or stretching your awareness more broadly across your peripheral vision so that you could sense over here what certain values and colors there are, okay? And this will allow you to align details as you look at stuff, okay? So right now I know my hands are pretty much level because I see them in my peripheral vision, okay? Same way with looking down here and up here, I could see where my hands align. I'm not looking directly at them, but I sense it in my peripheral vision, okay? Because I have this matrix of rods and cones layered across the inside of my eyes. And as light is bouncing off of everything outside and going into my eye, it's hitting the rods and cones in different positions across that matrix, okay? So as I move things around, the light starts reflecting in different ways and hitting different positions on this matrix within my eyes, okay? Now, that's why it's important to look around and get a feeling of how things change as you move. It allows you to become more orientated and more connected with what you're actually doing so that you become more capable of doing stuff, right? Such as drawing, okay? Now, the reason why I mention this is because as you look at stuff, you have to search. You have to move your eyes and your mind and become aware of where things are. You're basically moving around this object and trying to understand it, trying to see it in different ways that you haven't seen before, okay? You can't just look at it one way and expect to draw everything. You have to look at all the different parts, all the different details, and find relativity while you're looking at each detail at how it aligns or is similar or different to other details around it, okay? It's a very complex process that a lot of people don't appreciate as much because they don't actively do it as much as artists do, but at least not consciously aware of that they're doing it. But so that's why I mention it. So this way of orientating our awareness is why we are going to use a grid, because the grid helps us simplify this process into horizontal planes and vertical planes, okay? It allows us to use just two directions or two ways of orientating things across the entire image, okay? Now, there are other dimensions that we'll have to measure as well, such as the values of things. It has to be measured in well, a value scale basically between dark and light. And luckily our eyes are capable of feeling that, and we can compare how we draw the values to the actual value of the object. So with that long explanation over, let's begin creating the value inside our image. I have 3 pencils that I use, a 2B, 4B, and 6B. These represent how soft or hard the graphite is. The higher numbers are softer and thus rub onto the paper more, which results in a darker value. I begin with the 2B pencil since that will appear lighter. I don't want to begin with a darker value because it may cause me to overlook the softer tones. By starting with a lighter value, I can progressively build up the value towards a darker shade in a controlled manner. It also allows me to begin feeling out where these values will be positioned before I decide to go darker. It will become difficult to remove the graphite from the paper the darker it becomes. If we start lightly, it allows us to erase while we compose the details of the shadows and textures that we see. I generally look for the darkest and lightest areas of the object and push those values first. This provides structure for the intermediate tones to extend from, similarly to the way the perimeter of the object allows details to extend within the space within. Having a good grasp on where the darkest and lightest areas are allows us to extend the value scale from these locations. Notice how I push the darker value inside the opening at the top, as well as outside the lip that curves towards us. I can keep pushing the value darker here using softer pencils to get a feeling of the range of tones that are possible. It also allows me to see how these tones can be extended to nearby areas. This process is repeated over and over again as I work my way around the image. I can only focus on so much at one time. Knowing that these processes have a similar pattern to a fractal, it makes me question if life performs the same way. I wonder if energy in this universe is traveling so quickly through space. Perhaps there is just one thing or particle that is seemingly everywhere, and we are just experiencing the time it travels at a relative scale that combines many dimensions of space together. Everything we see could just be the focused points of greater interest, places where darkness meets lightness in some harmonized way. You may have noticed that I'm working my way down from the top of the image. This is because I want to avoid rubbing my hand against the graphite that is on the paper. If I started at the bottom right corner, I would have to be more careful as I work on the rest of the image. The drawing would end up underneath my hand, and there would be the possibility of rubbing against it as I rest my hand on the paper. There will be cases where this is unavoidable regardless of where I start, because over time we revisit places we've been before as we push the values more. Being mindful of our hands will allow us to prevent ourselves from smudging the underlying image in unintended ways. As we build up more graphite on the paper, the easier it will be to smudge due to the increased amount of particles that have been dispensed onto it. This is yet another example of how this whole process helps build a more structured and controlled way of thinking inside our minds, and how our capabilities are reflected in our work. If you are feeling emotional or you are under a lot of stress, it is likely to reflect in the way you work just as much as it would reflect with a controlled and calm mentality. Our lives develop like a picture being drawn through time by mysterious hands. In moments it appears sketchy, and in others it appears clear and well-defined. By utilizing a grid, it allows our mind to adhere to a structured way of thinking. It's like using a machine at the gym to aid you with lifting weights. It provides a rigid way of moving so that nothing is out of line. It focuses the energy to the areas being exercised and prevents stressing other areas that need to rest. As we draw, this helps alleviate the weight the entire image has on our psyche. It becomes more bearable due to how it is perceptively spread across the intercrossing lines of the grid, lines that serve to hold it all together. There's quite a lot of variability within the reflections. Notice that the darker values have shapes that appear to stretch up the neck of the object and fan out in places where surfaces become broader and flatter. In the center of the object where the curvature is tighter, the reflections are pulled together more closely. This is because the surface that curves more will reflect light from a greater range of directions. So in this case, it will appear to capture more details from the surrounding space and pull it all into a smaller area on the object. Let's continue exploring the values. Notice that I have left this particular area alone, as it appears to be an area with the lightest value relative to the values nearby. With the majority of the values situated lightly, I switch over to a softer pencil to push the values deeper towards a darker value. The amount of pressure matters when you are dragging the tip along the paper. There are a variety of ways you can hold the pencil to control the level of pressure you exert. More pressure will result with darker values. Being able to vary the pressure while you work will allow you to create gradual changes in value from light to dark. This will be important as we shade the surfaces that are curved. Light that hits a curved surface reflects in a wider range of angles compared to a flat surface. Due to the curvature, the difference between dark and light transitions across a broader area. By controlling the pressure of the pencil against the paper, the smooth characteristic of a curved shape can be achieved. It takes some time to develop your hand coordination, but the more you exercise it, the more your sense for it will develop. Holding the pencil near the tip will direct more pressure into the tip, whereas if you hold the pencil away from the tip, less pressure will be directed into it. If you grip the pencil with more tension, it will add pressure, and if you hold it loosely, it will cause pressure to escape. Holding the pencil at an angle will cause less pressure than holding it directly straight up and down. There are many ways to adjust the pressure. How you move your hand and fingers also affect it. Trying to explain it can be exhausting and confusing, so sometimes it is best to just try various ways out and see what results you get. This is the case where it can be good to observe yourself in addition to what you're trying to draw. I noticed that some of the finer detail around the body of the object blends too much into the rest of it, so I make an effort to pull out those details by darkening them in the appropriate areas relative to how I see them in the image. It's important to keep looking back and forth between the drawing and the reference so that you can gauge how your changes to the drawing reflect more or less like what you are seeing. The process isn't all about simply drawing. It includes having to observe how you are drawing it so that while you draw it, you can make adjustments and fix anything you notice that doesn't appear accurately. Sometimes you can discover accidents that turn out to be new useful ways of drawing, because sometimes we end up producing results we weren't expecting, and sometimes they are better than what we had planned. The drawing process stretches itself across time. It becomes repetitive, having to continuously drag your hand back and forth across the paper, line after line, rubbing more graphite onto the page. The grid stands motionless with its rigid structure. The object with its less rigid form tries to convey a pattern to distract from the mundane qualities of life. Or maybe it is simply our mind trying to escape the situation. In any case, it provides a fleeting moment where we forget what we are doing and just let stuff happen on its own. How about we speed things up a bit? This has taken a while to draw, as you can tell. even if it's sped up. So let's speed it up even more. The more you work, the more your mind and body will become connected, and the movements you make will begin to develop into more precise and effortless gestures. There will be a type of muscle memory that is acquired that will allow you to perform the same patterns over and over again for longer and longer durations. In the beginning, it may feel difficult to move, as your mind may have uncertainties as to how it ought to move to produce the results that you seek. But over time, the answers to these questions become revealed, and your skill and talent will show for it. I keep going back over areas that I want darker. There are a variety of ways you can approach this process, and a lot of it relates to the materials and tools you use. As the pencil scrapes against the fibers in the paper, it will cause the graphite to be collected in certain fibers more so than other fibers. This is based on the direction you scrape and how the fibers are organized. It produces a texture where there are dark and light spots. By changing the direction that you scrape against the page, it will cause the graphite to rub into the fibers different ways and help fill in the white space. Another method is simply to apply more pressure that will cause more friction and allow the graphite to spread deeper into the fibers. It will also flatten the fibers a bit as well, which may end up reducing the friction if it is repeatedly worked over. Having softer pencils will allow you to get darker values without pressing as hard. Having a sharper tip to your pencil also helps by allowing you to focus the pressure into a precise spot on the page. This helps the graphite to dig into the fibers more. If the tip is blunt and dull from being used, the surface area touching the paper will be broader and spread the pressure out so that the pressure against the paper is lessened. This could be useful if you don't want to apply a lot of pressure. You could use broader pieces of graphite or use the side of the tip to rub against the paper, which would end up with a lighter amount of pressure. As you can see, knowing how your tools and materials work is important when you are drawing. So at this point, the majority of it is drawn out. I begin focusing on details that don't look quite right. Basically anything I notice that looks a bit off or different than the reference image, or anything that looks out of place with the rest of the drawing. This allows me to tidy up any loose ends and begin considering the drawing as complete. I could spend hours improving the drawing, making it more accurate, fixing little things here and there, but you have to make a compromise and decide whether the time it takes to push it further will be worth it or not, especially considering so much in the latter stages rely on what has already been done. Sometimes it just becomes too difficult to change something due to how much underlying structure is wrapped up in it. I feel pretty satisfied with the result at this point, so I'm comfortable with moving on. We've come a long way and the drawing feels complete, but there is much more to do beyond finishing a piece of art. Creating art is a process that prepares you for many other things. The observation skills and ability to relate details can translate over into other areas of life, and it is important to figure out how your creativity relates with the world. Just as we create structure within our images that we draw, there is also a structure to our life that we develop over time as we travel on top of the canvas of the world. I will be taking this piece of art that I created and sharing it with random people. By doing this, I will get a greater understanding of how my work affects me as a person among many other people in the world, and also help me find relativity between my art and other things. This process has the potential to help us connect with other masters, which leads us towards developing ourselves into masters, and in the end build a greater and more meaningful picture in our life. So let's go trace the pieces back to the master. I'm in the park, a park in Elmhurst, and I'm by the art museum. I thought I'd come here to show people this drawing that I created. Hey. Do you have some time to... I'm going around asking people to see what they think of my art.
So yeah, I mean, that's not being an art person. I love the symmetry of it. Right. Looks like it's got texture, if anything. Looks like you did a good job on picking up whatever texture was on it, but the form, I mean, looks great. I can't draw, so it looks very pretty to me. Coloring, shading looks great. Seems pretty straightforward. Any other questions for me around it? Or?
No, that's all right. So you think it's rendered well?
Yeah, it's rendered. I'm a symmetry type of guy, so it looks like it's got some symmetry there.
Yeah.
Being looks like some sort of metal vase.
Yep.
I would take it.
Yep.
But yeah, I kind of see somebody tried to pull, or you drawing it looked like you tried to pull some texture out of it, or whatever was patinaed on that piece of metal. But yeah, it looks like it's coming through.
All right, thanks.
I see it. Awesome.
Right, thank you.
No worries. Have a good day.
Right, you too. Hi. Do you have time to? Can I ask you a question?
Oh, sure. Where are you going now?
I'm just going around asking people what they think of this drawing that I drew.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I love this. The way you swirled that out.
Yeah.
And your harp. Yes. And you know what? The little details, just the brim around here and that really breaks it nice. But it keeps it simple.
Yeah.
I do like it.
Thanks.
What would you picture it in? In a metal, like a silver one, or would it be a porcelain? You know, a pottery?
Like metal. Yeah.
Yeah, metal would be better. Yeah.
Yes.
I so I hope you were saying. Yes, it looks like a beautiful.
Thank you.
How tall would you picture that?
Oh, this. Well, I actually drew it from an object, so this actually exists.
Oh, it was that size?
Yeah. Well,
So,
it was about
three, 4 like this.
maybe from here to there.
About there.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not as big as it appears there,
Right.
but it would be
Just
that scale.
slightly smaller. Yeah.
Good luck. You got talent, I think.
Thanks.
Of course, I'm not an expert on it, but I do like it.
Yes. Thanks. Look at this grid. You can see that the grid exists in places you wouldn't expect, but it's used for similar things. For example, in this case, it allows the plants to kind of grip onto a more rigid structure. It gives it more support, more strength. You could see it happening, okay? And you could see the plant like wrapping around the metal structure, the structure that's straight, and then you have like this less rigid structure with the wooden stems of the plants kind of wrapping around it because it's more flexible. As it comes in contact with the rigid form, one of them has to give to the other one, has to kind of make way for it. But in a way, making way kind of helps it maintain its life, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying, but I kind of do. I'm just kind of letting it flow, I guess. I don't know. Hey, could I ask you some questions about something? Do you have time? I'm going around asking people what they think of this drawing that I created, that I drew. Just some comments on it, maybe. Trying to get a reaction from it, see what people think.
Looks three-dimensional.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Good shading, rendering, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it right here. Good shading right here, especially right here.
Cool.
It's good.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome.
I'm here at another park, which is a little bit more quieter, at William A. Redmond Park. That's what the thing says on the stone over there. Hey, could I ask you some questions about something?
Sure.
I drew this drawing and I'm looking for people to give some comments on it. I'm helping people learn to draw. Whatever comes to mind.
Oh, it looks nice. I just got some good shading in this thing.
Yeah.
You're just like teaching people how to draw, like doing like a class or something?
Online.
Online?
I'm creating videos, like tutorials and things that explain how the drawing process and things like that.
Oh, you got like a YouTube channel or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm starting one.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's actually, that's not bad. I mean, it's better than I could do.
It's a drawing that I created with pencil.
That's pretty cool.
Oh, thanks. I'm trying to teach people how to draw. So, and part of the process is finding out what people think of the drawings and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, I think that's really cool. It's got good lighting, good shadow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Sure.
All right, thanks. It's just like a vase that holds liquid.
Yeah, picture. Yeah, no, I think it's good. Maybe a little bit more a darkness down here, so sort of how you've shaded this.
Okay.
Shade down in here a little bit.
So you think it's a little less
light.
complete down here?
Yeah.
And not as even.
For the shading, you've got a lot of dark shading sort of here, but then when it comes down here, you haven't really shaded too much, so maybe down in this bottom part. But otherwise, it's a very nice drawing.
All right, thanks. All right.
Good.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I just want to give some final thoughts on what I experienced today, asking people about my drawing that I did. There was one person, it was the first person that I asked, or that commented on it. One thing he said really struck me, or I found surprising. He said that the drawing had patina on it. I think it was the first guy that said it. Anyways, one of the people said that there was like patina on it, and there was like a patina on the object. I don't know how he got that from the drawing, because I don't know, he was looking at like the texturing, but the texturing is what I think was part of just like the paper with the fibers and rubbing across the fibers. It gave it like a texture, but in a way it does kind of resemble the patina on the object. So it makes sense that he would say that, but I just found it surprising that he was able to notice that, and he interpreted it in that way. So something unintentional about the medium, about the graphite and the paper, something about that revealed unexpectedly some truth to the object that was being drawn. And that kind of shows how important the medium is in conveying something to the viewer, I guess. I don't know, but I thought that was probably the most interesting comment that I heard today. I feel like this is a good process, or something good to add to the video, because it makes artists think about more than just their drawing. It makes them think about how it relates to other people and how they relate to other people in the world by doing their work, and whether or not what they're creating is producing a result that makes them feel like what they do is worthwhile, basically, because a lot of what we do is relative to what other people do, and it's about finding structure or a way of continuing what we do and having support from the world and others and that sort of thing. We're trying to create a bigger picture here, right? Tracing Masterpieces is brought to you with the support of our patrons. I'd like to give a special thanks to Darkening, who has been a supporter for 8 months. If you would like to support the channel, visit tracingmasterpieces.com/support for more details. We also have a Discord channel where like-minded people can find camaraderie while exploring their observation skills and artistic talent. Visit tracingmasterpieces.com/discord to join the conversation. If you enjoyed watching, please like and subscribe. Your continued support helps translate a greater picture of the master within each of us. Together we are Tracing Masterpieces.